Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the Ietsie Klein channel. I'm your host, Gatreda. And let's kick this week off. So I had quite an interesting chat with my bestie, AJ. And she mentioned that a lot of what I do on my channel is just talking, and I could have it as a podcast. So I have listed all my old videos under a podcast enabled playlist is what it's called on YouTube. So you guys can go have a look there if you would like. I did see that it shows the video together with the audio, which I traditionally have qualms with because in my opinion, a podcast is audio only. So I did look it up, and it looks like the language is shifting amongst people, in that podcast is more now something that is episodal, that have a set release cadence, and sometimes, but not have to, is more like a conversation between two or more people. In my case, I'm just chatting to you guys, but I'm having fun doing it. In that spirit, I'm going to start naming my videos podcasts, just for search metrics and things like that. It's probably going to be the Ietsie Klein Podcast, because I don't want to think of a special name and then have to change brand, and it's not necessary, I think. I prefer to keep things organic, natural, neutral. It's very much my style. Even in my editing, I don't do a lot of editing. Not necessarily because I can't or don't want to, but because then the cognitive load on myself will be too much, and then I won't make these episodes. And I do enjoy making them. So yeah, here we are. Cool. So, quick update about my current project. I have been obsessively knitting only one thing. The chicken bag is back in rotation. It's my favorite project bag of all time. Thank you, Amanda. Here she is. So this is the raglan that we were discussing. That's the front. There we go. This is the raglan that we have been discussing last week in terms of substituting a vastly different yarn in the pattern. And you'll notice that the pattern states you should start with the ribbing, and I didn't. I just started with plain cast on. The reason for that is twofold. I did the ribbing for the size that we worked out we want to do, which was the 128 centimeter size, which would have, with the yarn substitution, worked out to a 109 centimeter bust. And when I cast it on the ribbing and I worked a fair bit, I realized that the fit of the sweater is meant to be oversized, which means that if I have the neckline that's going to fit on an oversized sweater, which obviously is not going to be oversized, it's going to be a normal neckline, that neckline is going to be too small for the shape that I want at the bust. So I ended up taking a middle road, and I cast it on the same amount of stitches as for the 128 centimeter, but then I added 4 stitches on each raglan section. So it's a little bit of an increase, but it's to bridge the gap between a relaxed fit and a fitted fit when it comes to actually splitting under the arms. So we have fitted this. Grant is very happy with the fit, and now I'm just flying through the body. As you can see, I'm already quite far down the body. I'm hoping to have this done in a few weeks, probably not by next week. As much as I did knit a lot this week, I don't think I'm going to have as much time this coming week in the evenings. But such is life, it goes. I haven't really been working on anything else. I do plan to work on the Bias Bliss cowl this weekend and next weekend, because I need to finish it for the deadline, which is middle of February, if I remember correctly. So you're probably going to see a finished object soon. But then, other than that, by request from AJ, a chat about notions. So I've been thinking about how I want to shape this, because when you talk about notions, I think that a lot of people are in different places in their crafting journey, and then how you feel about notions is different. And I want to frame it from the perspective of things that you need to look out for as a beginner, and things that you can use to make your life a little bit easier as you progress through intermediate, advanced, and expert and beyond. So yeah, some things to think about is what I'm going to be including. I'm going to share my experience with the different notions and what I like about it, what I don't like about it, and then also talk about exactly what type of notions you do need as a beginner. So I'm going to basically be talking through the notions that I do have, and then a few honorable mentions of notions that I absolutely hated and got rid of. So I can't show them, but I can talk about them. Cool. So first up, my notions is organized in this bento box from Yokiko. It's very convenient for me, partially because there's a removable section, but it also have these nice dividers that you can have your notions separated. And then when I do need to go somewhere and like a holiday or something like that, I just grab the entire notion box instead of having to work out what do I actually need. So in here, I have different kinds of stitch markers. So the first one I do want to talk about is what a lot of people call bulb stitch markers. So they look like almost a question mark that's been closed up, and then they open up similar to a safety pin. So these ones are great to use if you need to use a large amount of stitch markers, but they're not necessarily the best stitch marker. So I find the ones that has paint on them, they sometimes can be strange and sticky when it comes to your stitches. So if you manage to like split yarn, the paint bits feel like it's catching on the yarn. It's not a smooth push through. So I prefer the silver ones or the golden ones over the painted ones. Although I must say the colored painted ones tend to have a slightly sharper tip. But it's very much objective, very much up to your own feelings. I prefer not to use these when I'm using larger needles as stitch markers that's on the needle. So I would rather put them in my work to count rows or something like that. Because with larger needles, if the marker is flipped, that the thin side sits on the cable, when it comes to pushing your stitches onto your needles, the thin side then catches on your thicker needles. And it feels a little bit like it scratches your needles. It just doesn't feel safe. And I do like my needles, so I would prefer to protect them. In that spirit though, what I do prefer to use when it comes to larger needles is what they call a huggy hoop type of clasp. So it's a round clasp that you can fold open and closed. The other reason why I quite like this particular stitch marker is that when you fold it open, it remains open. You can position it in your work however you want it, and then you can fold it close again. I do find the ones that have metal charms on them, if you have to use a lot of them, they can get a little bit heavy. So it's just something to keep in mind there. If you have to use a lot of markers, especially on bigger needles, I do prefer what they call floops. So you get them in different sizes. So this one is a bigger size. It's like an elastic that has a metal ball at the bottom to give it a little bit of weight, so that the metal ball tends to flip to the downside. So these ones are the bigger ones, and you also get them in a smaller size like this for smaller projects or smaller needles. A few times Luna Fibers have included some, I'm not sure whether she made it herself, whether she managed to purchase it somewhere, but it's a very similar type of thing, but it has like a tiny pom-pom ball at the bottom, which is hella cute. And there are like different colors and different color combinations. Here's one that's teal and purple. Super cute. So I don't know whether she would be willing to sell those like separately, But otherwise, to get the Floops in South Africa, they can be a little bit costly. So I wouldn't recommend this particular type for beginner. You do also get closed rings. So these ones are from Chiagu. These ones are plastic. You get metal ones. You get all sorts of different ones. So because they can't open and close, they're mostly for knitting to have on your needles. The plastic ones are a little bit more lightweight. But the metal ones, you can get one that fits your needle size quite nicely. I do find the plastic ones has a bit of thickness to it. So if you have a lot of them, it can affect how your stitches work a little bit. But yeah, that's it about stitch markers. If it comes to beginning, like just starting out, I honestly think a bunch of bulb stitch markers is perfectly good enough until you start noticing how you use your stitch markers, because people use stitch markers differently as well. Sometimes when patterns say mark your stitch, you can learn to read your stitches and not mark the stitch. So over time, you might find that you don't need your stitch markers so much, which is the case with me. I mostly use them if there's like things that's harder to see, like a plain raglan seam that doesn't have cables or something like that. But yeah, a pro tip, very big pro tip. If you're interested in getting the bulb type stitch markers, don't Google for bulb stitch markers, as the community likes to call them, because you're going to buy 20 for like exorbitant amount of money. Google for swing tag pins, because then you can buy like thousands of them for a very decent price, like 70 Rand for thousands. So that's why I have like what looks like a spider nest of black ones, because I bought so many and I've been giving them away left, right, and center. I still have so many. But it's nice to have that many, because if I want to count stitches in a sock, for example, I can just leave my stitch markers in. I don't have to bother about like recycling them or moving them around, because I only have a few. I've got enough that I can count every row in every project and still have some left. Cool. Next up in my little boxy is needle stoppers. So these are typically silicone type of fabric products, material. You can buy them from like stores that sell beads that's meant to make baby chew thingies at a bit of a more reasonable price than what you could in just a set for needle stoppers at other Notions suppliers. But then sometimes those are sold as a blind box, and sometimes it's hard to get them. It's a bit of a gamble. I don't use them a lot, if I'm quite frank. If it's a project that has a small circumference and I have small circumference needles in it that the stitches have a tendency to fall off, then I might consider using them. But if you're not someone who jostles your project bag around a lot, or tend to like leave your stitches quite close to the needle tips, that you prefer to pull your needle out all the way to store it now, not to like pull it out and be funny and have your stitches live. I don't think needle stoppers is a necessary thing. It's a cute thing. It's a very trendy thing, but I don't see it as a necessary thing. These two ice cream ones are my favorite ones because they're different colors, and somehow that makes my brain feel good. The next thing in here is I've got this fun one. So this is a product I used to make. This particular one Yalian bought for me. I made them at one of my markets, and I was so scared they're going to sell out, and I didn't want to buy one for myself. And then Yalian bought one and she left my store, and then she came back and she's like, yeah, this is for you. I bought it, so you don't have to worry. So that was super cute. So it's just a polymer clay heart, but it has a little bit of a blade in the inside. That you can take your thread and pull it over and cut it. So this is extremely useful to have if you fly a lot, because you can cut your thread, but it doesn't look like a scissor, and you can't really threaten someone with a little plastic heart like You're not going to cut anyone like this. So yeah, it's very useful to have if you do fly a lot. But yeah, I suppose now that I don't make them so much anymore, they're a little bit harder to get. But I have contacts that still do clay stuff. So if you're desperately in need, I can put you in contact and I can tell them how to make it with a big open heart. Cool. Okay, next up, as we scrounge around, let's talk about this. This is needle grippers. So it's a little piece of rubber that has a sticky bit on the inside. I tend to keep them together like this so that, well, stuck together, so that the sticky bit on the inside doesn't get fluffies on it and then stop being sticky. But I must say, feeling the outside, I don't think that would happen. But what you use it for is when you have interchangeable needles, you can grip your needle and turn it nice and tight so that you don't have a situation where your needles keep coming loose, which do tend to happen sometimes if your needles are either getting old or you don't turn them in tight enough with just your normal finger grip. Okay, let's talk about darning needles. So these come in different shapes, different flavors, different sizes as well. So you get the cheapy type of ones that's just like a plastic one. Then you get these metal ones that have like a nylon loop at the back. So these ones are very handy if you have a yarn that's very splitty, because this big loop, it's easier to get the yarn through the loop and then to darn your work with it. It does tend to slip out if your thread gets a little bit short. So it can be a little bit frustrating to work with as well, but also very convenient because I don't like shoving things through little holes. There is another one that I have a preference for these days, which I found from Clover at Arthur Bales. So it has like a latch hook back where the latch hook is a bit stiff. It's not loose like a knitting machine ones. But what this means is that when you take your yarn, you can just push it against the top, push it down, and it slips past that latch. But then beyond that, it works like a normal needle. Just be mindful with this one that you don't end up accidentally pushing it a little bit back when you're darning in a particular direction, because then it will latch onto your stitches and it is quite tricky to get it out. So with this one, be mindful to just push through, pull straight through. No funny business, no jiggling, no moving around. So yeah, I think that's about it for darning needles. You can absolutely use the normal metal type. I've got one in this little thingy in the middle. You can use that. It's sometimes a little bit difficult getting the yarn through the eye of the needle, but they work perfectly fine, no problems. And you get them in bigger sizes as well, where the eyes are bigger. I would just say be mindful about whether you want a sharp tip or a round tip. So with a round tip, you'll be able to push your needle through your stitches much easier without going through the yarns themselves. And with a sharp tip, you can then push your yarns through, push the needle through the yarns themselves, which will make your yarn a little bit more secure, but some people don't prefer it. And I know especially with crochet, people absolutely do not prefer it. So yeah, it's very much an opinion thing actually, because as long as your yarns are secured, it's fine. It doesn't really matter so much. In this little green thingy, there's 2 T-pins as well. So these are from the keys from my Jiagu cables to be able to turn your cables. I have a small one and a big one in here. I only use these 2. Every cable comes with one. So the benefit though, they are sharply tipped. So you could use them as blocking pins, and they are stainless steel, which is very important for blocking pins. So if you have pins that you want to use for blocking pins that's not stainless steel, just be mindful because they can get rusty and then color your work, and it happens super quick. I've had it happen once where I was using pins that I used for sewing before, but I didn't realize where I bought them from, and they were not stainless steel pins. And when I came to my project, they started rusting. already, like from one use. So yeah, just be mindful of that. Luckily that project was darker colored, so it wasn't that big of an impact, but yeah, be careful. Cool. Then cable needles. So I only ever use one type of cable needle, and I use it very rarely because I've taught myself how to cable without needing a cable needle. You hold your stitches funny and then you flip it forward and arrange them and then knit them kind of attitude. I can make a video on that if you guys are curious about how to see how that works. But sometimes with some cables, it's difficult to do that, especially if you have cables where you need to not only swap a set of stitches, but swap a set of stitches and then swap them differently again afterwards. Then it becomes all kinds of fiddly. Then I prefer to use a cable needle. So the only type that I use is from Tulip. They are plastic ones. They have this square bend in the middle, which means that when I hold my stitches to the front of the bag, it's very easy to flip the needle up or down. I don't like the ones that have just a hooky, a corner, one singular corner, because when it comes to doing cables over more than about 3 or 4 stitches, that corner becomes too tight and then it feels like my stitches are going to slip off. Which also brings me to my most hated notion that I got rid of really fast. It's called, I can't even remember what it is called. I'll have to look it up. I'll put it in text somewhere here. But what it is 2 very short needles that are connected with a wire that has been covered with a bit of like, kind of like hair tie type of business. So it's meant to be able to use as a cable needle or as a stitch marker or to fix your stitches with. But to be quite frank with you, that thing does none of those 3 things well. So as a cable needle, it's hard to move your stitches over that little fabric bit because it's grippy. It doesn't want to let go of your stitches. And then as a stitch marker, it keeps falling out because it works itself out of the stitches again as you're working with your work. And as a fixer for your stitches, it is a very tiny size. So if you have not that particular size of needle that is being used, you get stitches that is not the right size when it's trying to like pick up something, or I don't know. This tool confounds me. I don't like it. I should never have bought it. But yeah, it exists. It's out there. Then the next thing, you have 2 things from Chiagu that I recently learned from Juanita from Juanette about. So the one is a cable connector, which is basically a very short double-ended threaded little bitty that you can connect 2 cables to each other. And the other is a end stopper that has one end that has a thready bitty and then a plastic bit at the top. But very interestingly, and I'm going to twist this one out now so that you guys can see I'm not lying, because I made her twist one out to prove that it's not lying, because I was like, how? Why would they do such a thing? So you can twist this plastic little square off, and then, surprise, surprise, you have a cable connector for free. So unless you have a need for just a cable connector for some reason, I would highly recommend to just not buy a cable connector and buy yourself some end stoppers and get a 2-in-1 tool with Chiagu. I'm very happy to have learned this because I tended to always lose my small cable connectors because they are very small, as you can tell. And now because they're connected to an end stopper, it doesn't happen anymore. Fantastic. It's great. Amazing. A++. Okay. I think that is about it for the notions that's in my notion box. So let's talk through other notions, big notions first. So there's 2 parts that I want to just quickly mention. One of them is project bags. So With project bags, you get different sizes, different shapes, different levels of complexity, different everything. In my opinion, go fit for purpose. If you're working with a small project, like for example, my clinch shawl, still small, put it in a small project bag. If you're working with a bigger project, or you know your project is going to get bigger, then put it in a bigger project bag, like this one. Both of these are from Volunplus, by the way. I'm a big fan. So these project bags are quite light because they're not frilly, they're not fiddly, there's nothing special about them. They might have like little dividers on the inside, which frankly I don't use all that often. It's nice to have available if you want to, for example, slip in a scissor and you want to know where your scissor is, that your scissor don't go and commit crimes in your project bag. But other than that, it doesn't have to be complex. You do get really nice project bags. So Yarn Room has launched a project bag series that is Yarn Room branded, and they are gorgeous. I have purchased one myself. I love it to bits, but you really don't need complex project bags. Like even little Woolies bags or whatever works for you, that's what you should use. The purpose of a project bag is basically just to keep what is happening with your project together. So whether you want to keep all your yarn together with your project in the bag, or whether you want to just be able to carry your project around without it getting hairy and picking up fluffs from the universe, that's what you should be using a project bag for. You don't need a project bag per project. You don't need fancy project bags. You don't need project bags that are like leather. There's no pressure when it comes to project bags. Honestly, I have tons because they're pretty and they're made by lovely people, and I like to support lovely people. I actually see one here at the back that's been made by Estheresa. So that one is a little bit of a quilted aspect to it, which I love. So yeah, purchase what makes your heart happy when it comes to project bags. Don't go all out. Don't purchase what you don't want. Think about what you're going to be using it for, and purchase fit for purpose always. Then yarn bowls. So with yarn bowls, you basically get two types. You get the ceramic type like this, and then you get a wooden type. Ha, I have one. Let me just quickly empty it out. So then you get a wooden type like this. So they are both really lovely. They are both easy to work with. The most important part of a yarn bowl, let me just set this one down the way it's not going to fall. Most important part of a yarn bowl is that it has to have this kind of thing. But that's only if you want your yarn to be coming from a consistent location. So what will happen then if it has this type of like slippy thing, so you'll see this one also has one, you put your yarn ball inside the bowl, hilarious fun, and then you slide your yarn that's coming off the ball through this little loopy thing. So then your yarn can come through the little hole, and it's going to come from a consistent place whilst the ball is able to spin around on the inside, so that it doesn't like hold on to your yarn the way that it would if it's like just sitting on a couch or something like that. And it also is going to prevent your yarn from rolling around and picking up fluff from the universe. These days, I prefer ceramic type ones just because there's less friction when it comes to them, because I knit quite fast these days. So the wooden type ones is starting to put a little bit of tension on my yarn because they're not as smooth as the ceramic type ones. However, if you have children or pets who's liable to knock things down, be mindful, because the ceramic type ones can be pricey, and if they fall, they break and you cannot fix them. The wooden ones, however, you can. So I can see this one I've managed to drop, and Kyle have graciously fixed it very nicely for me. You can barely see it. But these type of things happen. So yeah, you can survive. So if you have a busy house, I highly recommend rather a wooden one over a ceramic one. You do get fabric ones, and you get those spinny type of ones, which in my defense I have not tried before because they intimidate me. the other part of why I like these types of yarn bowls, because it's not a set hole that you've got to thread your yarn through and then the ball and the bowl gets attached to each other permanently. You can then just take the ball out, take your project out into the world, come back, pop it back in. There is quite a few ceramic bowls that they just make a little hole that doesn't have like a slippy bit. It's just a hole. So if you use those and you thread it through the hole, just be mindful that you're not going to be able to remove your bowl from your bowl. So yeah, just something to keep in mind there. Cool. Now, the next thing I want to talk through is my needle case. So I have this super lovely hard case thing, also from Yokiko. This one I bought together with Janine when I visited her, and this was my first foray into the amazing world of Yokiko. So I really like this one because it fits the Chiagu needle case just. So you've got to fandangle the corners a little bit to zip it closed should you want to, but you can do that and it fits very nicely. So when it comes to needles, it's a big discussion. So I have some advice here. If you're a beginner just starting out and you're not sure whether this hobby is going to stick or not, I very much highly recommend to not purchase the cheapest pair of needles that you can find. Because yes, that makes it more accessible to start up. However, if you purchase super cheap needles, I'm talking like that bamboo type of ones with the backs of a plastic thing just jammed on there, there's no cable connectors, those type of ones, you're not going to have a good experience learning to knit, because your material that you're using is going to fight you all the way. You're going to have to fight to move your stitches over that cable connector. That cable connector is going to slip off fairly often. You'll have to push it back on again. You're going to drop stitches because of that. It's going to be a frustrating experience because of how poorly made your tools are. And I know that it sounds very harsh when I say it like that, but I would like to have people have a good experience so that when they actually learn to knit, they can pay attention to their muscle memory rather than paying attention to fighting their tools. So what I would recommend is, if you have the funds available, purchase a Chiagu set or a needle and cable, just the needle and cable, in a size for a project that's not that dependent on size, on gauge, right? So that if you, for example, purchase a 3.5mm needle, you do your gauge swatch and you realize, I need a 4mm needle, you don't have to go and purchase another needle. You can just continue. So something like the Sophie scarf or the Sophie hood even, that's a very good beginner project because you're just knitting. There's no funny business. If your gauge is a little bit off, you just knit a little bit longer or a little bit wider, it's fine. You can deal with it, right? And then you can match your needle with your yarn and you can have a fun, good experience and learn to love the hobby. If you can't afford something like Chiagu, then by all means, Owl is perfectly fine. Owl is a better quality one than cheap, take a lot, buy a whole set for 100 rand vibe stuff. It is a little bit more expensive than that, but you're not going to have a bad experience with Owl. Some people sometimes find Owl a little bit funny because it's got a powder coating on the needles. So it's actually a very good middle ground for beginners because it's not as slippy as stainless steel needles, but it's not as grippy as bamboo needles. So have a look at your budget, have a look at what you enjoy or don't enjoy in life, and make an informed decision when you buy your first set of needles. If you are getting deep into this hobby, if you are doing this for a few hours or for a week or two and you decide this is my jam, I want to be doing this for a few months or for however long, I very much, super duper, highly recommend to save up for a high quality set of needles, because A, you will be using all those needles, and B, Good quality tools will be with you forever, forever and ever and ever. They're never going to break. They're never going to let you down. They're never going to disappoint you. Okay. You can, with something like Chiagu, build up a set over time, which I also highly recommend, mostly because Chiagu comes in different sizes, and to find which size fits your jam sometimes takes a bit of time. So yeah, purchase within your means, but purchase things that's going to last. Okay, cool. That said, I love Chiagu. I think Chiagu should sponsor me by the amount of times that I've said Chiagu in this video. So what I did as a beginner knitter was that I built up a set one by one of the 8 centimeter needles. So I've got a full set of 8 centimeter needles, which I enjoyed in the beginning because for me it was a dual purpose. I could easily knit my sleeves without having to do magic loop because my brain absolutely hated magic loop until recently when Jua showed me a better way. But I liked then the shorter needles because I could work the body and the sleeves with the same needle. I didn't have to go and purchase different needles. But then as I matured in my knitting and I started knitting faster, I realized I want more stitches on my needles because then I have to shift my work less, which meant when I got to that point, I bought a few of the 14 centimeter needles and I realized this is really good. I would like to have a full set. And once I got to that realization, I went and I purchased a full set from the yarn room as my birthday gift from me to me. So you'll see there's a few of them missing, but it's just because they're in projects. So yeah, that's that. With the interchangeable needles, very important to know is about cable lengths. So Chiagu, because they have different size cables, different size needles, their cable length that they put on the packet is the length of the actual cable. So if you, for example, purchase a 35 centimeter cable, then your length that you have to look in the pattern when they say, okay, you need an 80 centimeter cable, right? You need to go 35 plus 12 centimeter tip on this side plus 12 centimeter tip on that side, and that's your final length that the pattern would be asking for, right? So in that case, it would be 35 plus 24, which puts you on 59, if my math is mathing good. So if the pattern were to ask for a 60 centimeter cable, you're good to go. But if they're asking for an 80 centimeter cable, your stitches might be a little bit tight on that configuration, and you might want to consider going up a cable size. So you can play with your needle combinations and your cable combinations if you want to be exact, but a centimeter here or there is not going to hurt anyone. When it comes to other needle brands, so Knit Pro, Tulip, Owl, everybody else, they measure their cable length that they advertise tip to tip. So if you purchase an 80 centimeter cable, that cable isn't 80 centimeters. The needles you attach to it, tip to tip, is going to be 80 centimeters because all of those brands have the same length of needles. Knit Pro these days have launched a shorter range, so just be mindful of that. That's going to affect your cable length. But the advertised cable, the size on the cables is the longer tip length, tip to tip, still, even to this day. They haven't changed that marketing. Okay, very important to know. Then, crochet hooks. Just because I'm looking at them now, I'll talk about other kinds of needles just now. So with crochet hooks, my preference is the Etimo Reds. I only use natural fibers. I don't use any acrylics. So this is a very good fit for me because mostly I crochet with cotton or merino. I do like the red color because it allows me to see where my needle is going much better than with the silver colors. I can't explain to you why. It just works better. You do get the tulip range in the rose and then the gold range. They're all fantastic in my opinion. What is important to me is an ergonomic grip. So a lot of people will swear to the death with clover hooks, for example, clover or more. I don't like them so much because they have a little bit of a square, wider grip, and then that feels uncomfortable in my hand. But yeah, each to his own. You got to find what works for you best. Even if it's the plain sticky ones, if you prefer those, that's fine. If you prefer to put the tennis ball onto your hook because of ergonomic reasons, do that. What works for you is what works for you. The only important thing is to purchase something that you enjoy working with and that's going to last. Because something like, for example, a plastic hook, it's liable to break if you're going to use cotton or a heavier kind of project. So just keep that in mind when you purchase. Cool. Other types of needles. So I really like these flyer type needles. So I have them in 2.25 and in 2.5 millimeter needles. The 2.5 ones, I was extremely bold and I bought them in Chiagu interchangeable sets. So they have these like 5 centimeter cables, and then I bought 5 8 centimeter, not 5, 3 8 centimeter tips, and that's my 2.5 millimeter flyers. They were very expensive. Do not recommend that. Highly recommend this Here brand. What I do like about them, they behave and can do exactly what double pointed needle tips can do. However, because they've got the flexible bit in the middle, it's a little bit easier for me to work with. So yeah, I really like them. And then you also get, let me just put these together. You get short 9-inch circular needles. These are typically for sock knitting or short or small circumference knitting like sleeves. So I've got quite a few in quite a few shapes and quite a few different configurations. So the standard Chiagu one, both sides is the same length and the same like sharpness, but you get interesting ones like this is the Addy Sockenwunder, where the two sides are different lengths, and you also get them in a basic tip and a lace tip. So the lace tip, I'm not sure which one this one is. I think this one's the basic. So the basic, both tips are rounded, but with the lace tip, the longer needle is going to have a bit of a sharper tip. So then that might be easier for you to work with for socks. I do recommend to try both configurations, see what works for you. If you're into that, if you are doing magic loop with socks, that's also perfectly fine. Because I know that with these ones, you have to hold your work a little bit differently, because when you're knitting with longer needles, you can hold your work like this with your wrist straights and then you knit like this. But with the shorter needles, because it's a short circumference, the edges of the work forces the edges of your hands to come up, which means that your wrists are rotating. And then when you're holding that small circumference needles and you're trying to work like that with your rotated wrists, some people experience wrist pain, some people experience hand pain. So give it a go if you want to, but if it causes you pain, stop. We don't want repeat strain injuries here. Okay. Rather than try out magic loop. Speaking of magic loop, my super top tip. Pay attention to your cable length and how you feel about working with it. So a lot of the times people recommend you got to go as long as you can. You got to have like a 93 or a 125 centimeter cable to be able to do magic loop comfortably. But in my experience, what then ends up happening is that I pull the cable endlessly, and that makes my brain feel itchy, and then I don't want to do magic loop anymore. I would rather throw it out the window. So I tried a 55 centimeter cable because the science of it kind of makes sense. If your tips are 12 centimeters long, right, you have 24 centimeters of length there. So your cable at the back needs to be 24 centimeters to match your cable tips, and then a little bit extra for the loops on the side. So 55 centimeters is just enough, in my opinion. 35 is a little bit of a close fit. You tend to lose your loops. But with the 35, you can just flip your needles through. Tanny Beansy always makes this kind of movement when she talks about it. So you just flip your needles through and you're not pulling for years and eons. And that has made all the difference for me for Magic Loop. And I prefer to do socks on Magic Loop now. Fun fact. Cool. Flipping to the back. Cool. This is now testament to fit for purpose. So this is a set of L double-pointed needles. I actually bought these in Bloemfontein with my first attempt at a West Knits cowl, MCowl. And I don't like using double-pointed needles. I needed it for the I-cord knitting because I didn't want to keep pushing back the circular needles or slip the stitches on the other end. It was just annoying. So I bought this cheapy set of L double-pointed needles. I only use them if I need to make an I-cord. I don't use them for anything else. So I don't have expensive double-pointed needles because the purpose is not there for them. Cool. Then with my cables, what I like to do is keep them in their original baggies. You'll see there's a lot because there's a lot of sizes and there's lots of different types. So I tried out the swivel one. The cable in here is just a plain red one. I don't quite like the swivel one. I used to like it. I don't like it anymore for a very simple reason. For small needle knitting, it is annoying. Because with the swivel connector, it's not a very smooth connection because it needs to swivel. There needs to be space, right? Makes sense. But then when you're knitting on a 3.5 millimeter needle or smaller, I don't like it when you move the stitches because you got to like sort of pick your stitches up over the join, which is all fine and dandy. But when you're speed knitting, it takes time. And I don't like it. It's wasting time. So I've shifted away from that. And I'm only using the solid red cables at the moment. Having a blast with them. They are fantastic. Then the last thing I want to talk to you about is my very favorite tool. They go by many different names. They look like this. It is barber cords, knitting loops, knitting flutes. There's lots. Knitting cords. People call it all sorts of names. So barber cords is because the original people who thought of this idea is called the knitting barber. But ultimately all it is just a silicone tube. It's not rocket science. So I have these from Knotty Habit. I have a few from Luna Fibers. It is my most used tool, my most favorite tool. They are great for fitting things. So if you get to a point where you want to fit something, you put a slightly smaller needle on your cable, you slide your stitches over onto the cord, you fit it, you slide it back on. No issues, no drama, no needle stoppers, no nothing. It's really convenient to use. I also prefer to use these for keeping my stitches on for sleeves, because if you put it on scrap yarn, I find that the stitches sort of collapse around the scrap yarn, and then when you pick them up again, the stitches are a little bit uneven. Whereas with the knitting loops, that doesn't tend to happen. It tends to like hold its shape and be structured and not have issues. So yeah, if you guys want to see my very fancy Chiagu flips, here they are. Very fancy, very nice. I love them to death. Whenever I use them, I'm like super careful about where I put them, and they go straight back into this pocket with the zipper zipped up. But yeah, cool. One last thing I do want to discuss about notions, which is one of my latest favorite tools, is a latch tool, a latch hook tool from Natural Fibers. So it has 3 little latch hooks that's very similar to machine knitting latch hooks, but they are arranged in this like fan formation. The reason for this is to make I-cords with. So I use it to bind off my I-cords as well. It does make a slightly tighter bind off if you just use it without any sort of thinking about it. But if you pay attention to your tension, it works really well. It works a lot faster than doing it by like stitch by stitch and slipping them back and stitch by stitch. It's also making very nice cat toys because my boy loves I-cords. Can't explain to you why. He's got a bright green one that he's playing with at the moment. So all of my 2 short little indies, I work into a little I-cord and then he plays with it for a while. But yeah, very handy dandy tool. If you get to a point where you really hate I-cords, but you do them fairly often, do invest in one. Yeah, I think that's about it for this video. I see I've been babbling for about 50 minutes now. Thank you so much for joining me. I really had a lot of fun talking through all my different notions, what I think about them, and some thoughts and ideas. If you have questions about anything that I discussed, please feel free to pop me a message. I'm happy to help. If you want links to anything, I'll try and put as much links as I can in the description box. But if there's something that I've missed or something that is very particular, so for example, the ceramic yarn ball, I think I got it from the Yarn Tree, but I don't think they have an online store. So yeah, I'll do what I can. And yeah, have a lovely day, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.